that I think one of the big problems with guys and gals that came home from Vietnam, primarily guys,
Yeah.
um, was that because the country was so divided over the war, that we didn't really get a lot of opportunity to vent, to get that poison, those horrible images, to talk about them and get them out of our system. Nobody wanted to hear about that.
Mm.
And so I think what happened was a lot of that poison stayed in their guts and drove them to substance abuse and drove them to becoming hermits and just becoming angry and bitter young men.
Yeah.
I recognized that after a while. And I said, look, I can't be one of those. I'm not going to be the professional, disgruntled Rambo veteran. That's just not me. And so because I have a writing talent and a kind of a performing talent, it occurred to me that one of the ways I could clear my guts or clear my mind or clear those images was simply to talk about them, was simply to write about them, to say, look, you may not want to hear this, and frankly, I don't give a damn, but I'm going to tell you about the things that are haunting me. I'm going to tell you about the images. I'm going to tell you what that war was really like.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be great. You're exactly right. It was cathartic. It was therapeutic. And I'm really glad I did it. And it continues to be.
Yeah. And I took you, I think you wrote your first book in the 80s. It wasn't like immediately after the war that you did this. Was there a time where it was, haunting you almost every day?
Yeah, there really was, Tanner. And I got to tell you, it was a period of about 10 years.
Yeah.
And had Mother Core not wrapped her loving arms around me and forgiven me my sins, I don't know where I'd be. I'd probably be in prison or dead. There's a hell of a difference between the war and the warrior.
Yeah.
And as the Marine Corps protected me and promoted me and sort of nurtured me, I began to heal. I began to think, that war may have been really horrible, and it may have really scarred some people. But the Marine Corps didn't do that. The war did that.
On your blog on daleday.com, you wrote, that fascinates me and makes me wonder why I occasionally pick at emotional scabs this long after my wartime service. It's a hard row for me to hoe. I was emotionally shattered after multiple combat tours when the war that defined me as a person and as a Marine ended in such a humiliating and ignoble fashion. For nearly a decade, I stumbled through my life in a sort of a daze, trying to justify the sacrifices I made and observed in Southeast Asia. It's fair to say that had I not stayed in uniform, surrounded by kindred and tolerant spirits, I might not have survived the peace that followed the war. Now, my takeaway from that was that the effects of PTSD were in Dale Dye's life, and they were softened by the Marine Corps camaraderie. Is that true?
Absolutely, Tanner. And you have taken from what I wrote the exact bottom line message. The Marine Corps saved me. There's no question in my mind. There will never be a question in my mind. And it was those fellow Marines, those people who had seen the owl or heard the owl and seen the elephant with me.
Yeah.
So when I would begin to run off the rails, when I would begin to run off the track, those guys would say, look, I get it. I was there. I saw it too. Just talk to me. Don't do something stupid. Just talk to me. And to this day, I think that's the mission that I try to get other veterans to do. Look, PTSD is handleable. It's not a new thing. And in fact, it can be a character builder. It can make you different than the average schlub out there on the street, who doesn't understand, who doesn't have his priorities in order, doesn't understand life or death.
Yeah.
But we've got to take care of each other.
Absolutely.
We really do.
100%.
And look, it doesn't make any difference whether I know you from Adam's off Ox. I'll spot you as a combat veteran, and you'll spot me as a combat veteran. And it just takes talking to us. We can say things or shorthand communication that nobody else can because we get it. And we get that feeling, that loneliness, that isolation that nobody understands. We get those flashbacks. We understand the images that are haunting you. And we've got to take care of each other in that way. Nobody else can do it. Look, we see this constantly, Tanner. I mean, you see horseback riding for vets, guitars for vets, outdoor hiking for vets, hunting and fishing for vets, vets on campus, vets on this, vets on that.
Thousands and thousands, something like 56,000 support groups now, nonprofits.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's all fine. But the bottom line is a guy or a gal who's in distress needs an empathetic, sympathetic ear. That's all it takes, really.
Some camaraderie. Some people that know.
Yeah, you've just got to trust that I know what you're talking about, that I've seen that same elephant, and I have to trust that you know that. And once we've established that camaraderie, once we've established that bottom line, once we've established that empathy, then we can talk to each other, and some of that crap that's inside us can come out and be gone. Banished. And that's a great place to get.
Absolutely.
But we have to help each other get there.
Absolutely. Now, I think you just answered this, but I'm still going to ask the question.
Okay.
What is one thing that you could tell someone who is coming home today that is having to survive that piece that you wrote about?
I'd say, look, I know it hurts. I know that it's going to bother you. I know it's a burr under your saddle. I know it's a tick in your ear. But you're not the first guy or gal to feel that way. You're not unique. I know that it's hard to find somebody to talk to. I know that it's hard to find somebody who's just interested in listening, much less understanding. So don't bother with that. Find yourself a buddy. You found a battle buddy in combat. Hell, you might not have known the guy. He's from, East Jesus, Tennessee, and you're from the West Coast. But together, shoulder to shoulder, in that hole or on that patrol, or kicking down that door, stacking up outside of it, he was your buddy. And he's your buddy now. You just got to find somebody. And it doesn't matter who it is, as long as he understands, as long as he's been there, as long as he's worn the cloth just like you have, then you got a buddy. And that buddy's going to help you. So find that buddy.
And I think that's where some VSOs come in. That's where you go to find your buddies. You find people that were like you to join that community again.
Yeah, and absolutely, Tanner. And don't come crying the poor ass. Just come in and say, look, I'd like to talk to somebody, but I need somebody who gets it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And find that body, and if he's not working or she's not working, find somebody else. But don't quit, because you can't keep that crap all bottled up inside you. If you do, it'll eat your guts and it'll kill you.